It's Greg, it's Athena, it's Jonah. It's another wonderful episode of Zag Talk. Hey, gang.
Hey, Jonah.
Hope everyone's had a great week. We've got a lot of stories to get into. Afterwards, we're going to talk to Darius Skirtu and Ani from McKinsey's Center for Future Mobility. They've got a brand new report about AV projections, and we're going to kind of dive into that. But before we get to those numbers, plenty of other numbers, because Q1 is basically just finished posting and things are up, up, up. Everyone smiles. Everyone's happy. Economy's go, go, go. Yeah, Greg? You're
What vibe
smiling.
session? What energy shot coming down the pike here? No. Keep the good times rolling and literally rolling on their way to my front door to drop off my meals.
Yeah, just checking out with all our favorite moving of people and goods companies. So DoorDash orders up 27% year over year. Revenue up a meteor 33%. Over at Uber, it's a 14% jump to revenue, with gross bookings on delivery side slightly outpacing mobility. I kind of like to watch that constant back and forth. Is the delivery or the taxi business bigger? And so delivery up 23% to mobility is 20. And then our little friend Lyft up 14%, revenue coming in at 1.7 billion for the quarter. Don't forget about them. But what's the problem, guys? Everything's growing.
I mean, times are good for them when Lyft is up double digits. I mean, that's been a while.
Good job, Lyft.
Well, it is interesting to see this. This is the whole dissonance in the American economy, as we talked about in our last episode here, with this notion of the K shape where things are good. But interestingly enough, you would think that that this boom in numbers is being driven by that top 10% of American households who are riding high on AI stocks and spending money. But there was a piece published back in March by The Argument where they crunched the numbers on this, using Claude Code no less, and found that basically the people who spend the most on delivery on these services are earning less than $50,000 a year. So it's not the highest households; it's the ones who are the most sort of time poor who are ordering a ton of this. So perhaps, Jonah, as things get worse, the earnings get better. Countercyclicality.
Sure. If you're working 3 jobs, you don't have time to cook. I will note that
if you're working 3 jobs as an Uber driver, you don't have time to cook.
In the last couple of years, they've all sort of made these big partnerships where they can accept SNAP EBT for your grocery deliveries. So that could be powering a big part of the...
Also, I think of that Uber deal with Dollar General. I mean, it's sort of interesting. You see it play out at every level of the socioeconomic spectrum there, but yeah.
Yep. Athena, aren't you jealous of our bleak country?
I'm so envious, the land of hope and dreams. Although I will say we've had...
So that's not quite what our slogan was, but thank you.
Can I say that? I never listened too closely. We've had some interesting stories come out on that side as well. There was an expose about London delivery drivers quite recently that a lot of them are actually homeless because they get paid so little that a lot of them are living on the streets and picking up shifts. Seems that it's kind of affecting both the delivery drivers and the people ordering the deliveries.
Sounds systemic. Well, if that is backwards-looking numbers, forward-looking, we got an IPO on the horizon. Our friends at Lime, they're seeing some green, some lime green. And to me, this is an interesting one because they'd sort of always been teasing this for seemingly years. It's like, oh, the IPO is just around the corner. Oh, yeah, we're cash flow positive. Oh, it's going to happen any day now. And it's finally here, right? And this is sort of like the big dog in the micromobility space. So it feels a little back to the future-y, but they're targeting around a $2 billion raise, they say. Last year's numbers, they showed a $59 million loss on $887 million in revenue, which was, I think the revenue was up, but the loss was also up year over year. I don't know, Athena, you've been digging into this one.
I've been digging. Well, as usual, we can't ignore Uber's presence in any of this, and certainly their tie-up with Lime has, I think, put Lime in front of a lot more people globally. But we can't really ignore what the filings say, and they're not the most positive. Widening losses between 2024, 2025. From my attempts to interrogate them on this, they didn't have much to say, to be honest.
Shock.
Something vague about expansion, targeting new markets. You name the country and they will find a reason why the regulation of that country has made it difficult and caused them to lose money. But I think there is a sense with Lime that, if they can't have a successful IPO, can any shared micromobility company really do it? Is the time right? But, the numbers don't lie. And I think there does seem to sometimes be a trend of companies IPOing almost as just a bit of a a boost for views and sponsors and investors. And if that doesn't work, they're in a bit of
But they're
trouble.
not doing it out of the goodness of their own heart.
Certainly not.
No, I mean, I'll be very curious where this one lands, right? Like, if they're going for a $2 billion valuation, that's basically like a 2x multiple in the revenue, which is not too juicy. They say that basically if we don't get this cash now, we have all this debt due end of the year that's going to sink us. And I think that's interesting, right? So if they were talking about how they were free cash flow positive a couple years ago, I think basically that means that they had like asset backed financing on all the scooters. And so that means, oh, we didn't pay for those. Our debt financing partner did. And the bill's not due till a couple years from now. So we can say that we're making money. And then all of a sudden you got to pay the piper. So that's the crunch that they're in. I suspect they'll pull this off one way or another. But yeah, and I will personal anecdote. I always, if I'm taking a Lime, I book it through the Uber app because why have another app on your phone? So yeah, I can certainly see how that dependency is both a helper, but also means they're a little bit at the mercy of if Uber decides to prioritize something else on that important screen, they could be sunk.
I, for one,
Who
just like the
else?
fact that we have a good old fashioned IPO here where they're losing money and there's no clear path to global dominance here and they're just trying to get through. It's like old times.
A story we know and love. Well, anyways, moving on to AVs for a moment. Emo having some funny things happening across the globe. So do us the London update first, Athena.
Yeah, I think we're less used to Waymo troubles than you guys are in the States. So it's been a bit exciting to see that here. But yeah, local issues. So the local Green Party in Brent, which is a neighbourhood of London, has started a petition to pause Waymo's trials. They're obviously still in the trial stage in London after one of the test vehicles drove through a police cordon in Harlesden. Harlesden, for reference, is not the nicest part of London, so there are many police cordons there, and I can understand why that would cause some stress. And I think officers were investigating a stabbing, so really not the time for Waymo to be appearing on the scene.
Yeah, it was a double stabbing, which is just such a wonderfully British crime.
Yes, welcome to London. We don't have guns, we do have knives.
Yeah, I mean, impressive handiwork to get two off like that. I will just say that, yeah, we're so used to robots just barreling through crime scenes here in the U.S. that we pay it no mind anymore. You just sort of understand that that's the cost of doing business.
Yeah, I think that's old news for you guys. I did have a quick chat with Waymo about it. They said the vehicle was operating in manual mode and there was a safety driver in full control. It doesn't really, it's not very reassuring, to be honest. They have said that they've now suspended the driver pending an investigation.
You're gonna
Again,
get to have this whole rigmarole that we just had of rules around remote operators, where are they based, what are their qualifications. So, you're getting all our stories just a couple months later.
absolutely. Must be fun for you guys to see it recycled on our side. But you haven't escaped them either, have you? I heard that Waymo's now facing a lot of scrutiny in the US after recalling 3,800 robotaxis. Is that right?
Yes, one got stuck in a little floodwaters in San Antonio, and so they had to do a software recall. And yeah, I thought what was interesting is this gave us a peek into how many vehicles are actually on the road because Waymo kind of gives updates on a quarterly or so basis, but you don't always have like a live number. But you could see from the recall 3,800 or so robotaxis, and so it's a growing fleet, but it's also still in the scheme of how many Ubers and Lyfts and human cars are out there, pretty small. And we've seen some other numbers lately of talking about how like the usage in certain markets is flatlined, and I think that's not because of demand, but just because they're supply constraints still. There's only so many cars they can put on the road. They've basically run out of the classic Jaguars at this point, and they haven't switched the Ojais onto like non-pilot operations. So expect that 3,800 number to be the cap for a little bit. But one more fun one from Waymo, Greg.
Oh yeah, no. There was a reports here. We've got video footage of like more than a dozen Waymos streaming into a cul-de-sac in the affluent Atlanta suburb of Buckhead. So no injuries, no weirdness, but alarmed NIMBYs noting that here comes, and not quite a gated neighborhood, but yes, when a dozen Waymos just sort of roll into your subdivision, roll out again for no apparent reason, Waymo ascribed it to a routing glitch kind of thing. But But again, it's just sort of to me, it's just sort of interesting and telling here of the whole here are non-human intelligences acting unexplainedly in your neighborhood, in your urban environment here, and how do you know what's going on? How do you indicate it? This is something, by the way, shout out that by the time listeners hear this, we'll be in New York for the Makeshift conference with Super Bloom and Helpful Places, and we're going to be basically working on wayfinding for the presence of technology in public space. So be warned, this is a Waymo staging area. That's the kind of thing we'll
I
see in the future.
Speaking of swarming and non-human intelligence, I had some pet shrimp once upon a time, and I kept them in like a cylinder kind of
Sea
tank.
monkeys, Jonah?
And
Sea monkeys? Is
no,
that what you're
no,
talking
just
about?
like
No,
actual
okay.
shrimp. And one time I came home and they were all swimming in a swarming circle, just kind of like making a little hurricane. And I think they were trying to communicate something to me. So
Well, there you go. I mean, this
I
you get
can
to that
feel their presence in these Waymos.
Foreshadowing.
we can get into the philosophy of this, but yeah, when we see that in birds, it's a murmuration. So perhaps we should borrow that over of a
Yeah,
murmuration of
little
waymos is sort of
attenuation.
flying through the air in coordination, right?
And
Like this.
Buckhead, that's the part of Atlanta that just tried to secede a couple years ago, right?
Correct. Buckhead is sort of I don't know if it's the whitest percent. I don't have demographics at my fingertips, but yes, it is one of the affluent white communities of Atlanta, like Sandy Spring, which did secede, and some others have done as well, too. So it'll be interesting to see how fragmented governance might play into this as well. We've got communities across the states with private roads, for example. Forest Hills, Queens stands out. Forest Hills Gardens specifically has private roads. So it'll be interesting to see if we start to see like gatehouses pop up here to keep out autonomous vehicles.
Gotta pay your toll. So one other American tech supremacist trying to wash up like flotsam on Athena's beautiful British seas, Amazon Prime Air, which is the struggling drone delivery arm of the e-commerce giant, has just finally gone international. So they launched their first operations in Darlington in Northeast England. And using their classic MK30 drone, they're doing 7.5 mile radius, 5 pound packages, doing a pilot with the CAA, 10 flights per hour, 100 deliveries per day. So, not doing a tremendous amount of volume, but still enough to get people notice if you happen to live underneath the flight path. The BBC video I saw had people already asking questions about noise. I don't know. I mean, you guys are stronger regulators than we are, so I'm really curious what the appetite's gonna be like for this one, Athena.
Absolutely. Well, if anyone listening is planning to be at Farnborough Air Show in July, I will actually be grilling Amazon on this live on stage with the CAA. So I'll have more answers for you then. But I think it's an ongoing question we really have in the UK is, can you scale commercial operations and keep the regulation as tight as it is? And the CAA, it feels like they're kind of at an intersection now where they're really making that choice. Do we try to be more American, more Chinese, get those commercial operations working in, more imminently? Or do we stick to our kind of more civil aviation inspired flight rules? And it feels like they're not quite sure at the moment which way they're going. But I think ultimately what you guys start tends to come over here, and eventually that ease of access does, it does wash quite well with people. Perhaps not the NIMBYs, our British equivalents that Greg mentioned, but I think as you were saying with Deliveroo too, there's certainly always going to be a call for convenience. So I think this will be here to stay.
Yeah. Yeah, they're certainly gonna keep trying. And the MK30 drone, it's had some trouble lately. I mean, there are all those juicy videos of it striking the ground in Texas, hitting the same crane twice in Arizona. There's that one where it crash landed and the rotors were still spinning after it crashed, which was kind of mind-bogglingly inexplicable. So, watch out, school children.
Waymos and MK30s, just
It's
avoid them all.
nowhere you have to hide in the tube. That's the only place they can't get you. And I will say on a little bit more of, our speed, Amazon also bringing cargo equads, so those little four-wheel pedal bike boxes that we all love on this show, to DC. Obviously, they've been piloting that in New York City, and I wrote up a thing where I did a little test drive there. This DC expansion looks to be with Honda Fastport, which I've also taken for a test ride. Nice. It's, got all the bells and whistles you'd expect from a car company's attempt at making a kind of bicycle thing. But this one warms my heart, right? Like we're all pro people powered movement on this show. Obviously, these are much bigger in Europe and the UK too. You have like a much wider deployment, I think at least 30 cities. But DC, I think it could work there. You got enough small congested roads.
It can absolutely work. I'm just sort of curious in general about whether any of these auto OEMs are actually seriously committed to actually building out bike programs at scale. So in addition to this one, you also have Rivian, which is, with its Also venture, has unveiled a cargo bike. But I think, for example, as part of Porsche's, massive retrenchment, basically breaking up their joint venture with Mate Rimac, they killed their e-bikes and their batteries and other things
Yeah.
too. But they all started, it all looks sexy as hell, and then they get rid of them, kind of thing.
We
So,
yeah, we,
you
we
know.
we see this every couple of years from the OEMs where they're like, "Oh, we gotta do something that shows the market that we care about new mobility. The change is coming. We're not just selling cars." And they'll spin something up, and they'll spend a lot of money on it. I mean, like, I don't think they're going into it without honest intentions to some degree. But then, yeah, the market will change. I mean, Honda just had its first loss in like its corporate history, basically, and they'll be like, "Huh, all right. Like, if we pour another $100 million into this thing, like maybe we can eventually break even, or we could just sell one more pickup truck. So shut it down."
And hand money back to the shareholders, because of course that's all that matters.
Yeah, yeah. So I hope they stick with it. But yes, it would take, I have to imagine, a long roadmap
Well,
to
and
make
we'll
money
see,
off
of
these
course, with the
things.
Strait of Hormuz now. Now we're gonna enter a new cycle of electrification. So we'll see. I love reading
Yeah.
all those stories. And of course, listeners, we don't need to get into that one though. This notion of, will there be permanent demand destruction for fossil fuels? Is this the final nudge of the energy transition? We shall see. Silver linings.
Well, that cues up nicely. We got two public transit stories. So here in Los Angeles last week, or really by the time this airs, I guess 2 weeks ago, LA Metro finally opened the D line extension. So woo woo, new trains in America, rare day indeed. And just, personal anecdote, it was just so nice to see a big sort of civic to do here in Los Angeles. Lots of people smiling, lots of people taking public transit on the opening day, new trains. And just to kind of put it in context, I crunched numbers a little bit just to make Greg and I feel bad. I think, and someone I would love to be correct on this one, but basically since Los Angeles ended its previous spate of tunneled heavy rail station openings, which was in the year 2000, I think the entire country had opened six new underground heavy rail metro station, basically two in Puerto Rico and four in New York City. And so we just opened three in Los Angeles with a few more scheduled for next year. So really, like I'm saying, this was like a nationwide cause for celebration. We're that bad at making actual metros. Like, we'll do light rail, sure, but real metro underground, what's that? Athena scoffs.
Another reason I could not live in
Don't
America.
worry, I don't think the UK is really any better at this one.
Well, I don't know. Well, I can't get into this. I've already been fighting Americans about this whole walking to MetLife Stadium drama. I can't get into who builds better metros with you.
Well,
Well,
and then one more European story for you on the transit side. So what's new there?
Well, this is actually pretty positive for us as well. I say us as though we didn't leave the European Union, but I am German too, so I'll credit that side. Um, Basically, the European Commission has started this new passenger package idea, which essentially just simplifies cross border rail travel. I'm sure you guys have been to Europe many times, and you'll know that getting from Paris to Germany is probably faster than getting from, I don't know, one side of California to the other. In fact, it definitely is. But there is a bit of an issue when it comes to multi operator journeys. It's really easy to get scammed. There's inflated ticket prices, a lot of third parties kind of bringing in money. So, this idea that the European Commission is proposing would essentially just streamline the entire booking process, including multimodal, so buses. I think eventually also micromobility, so you can literally book your entire journey country to country on one ticket, which I think pretty much only works in mainland Europe. But I will be excited to try it when they come in.
Yeah.
that's interesting. And it makes me think of the trend now. The Wall Street Journal had a piece on this, on the rise of travel advisors, aka travel agents, which we of course had in the pre-web tying into the booking engines. And I just think it's interesting that, as part of perhaps of the larger overall trend of enshittification and adding sort of complexity at various interfaces, that now we have humans booking all of our travel again as well too. So, we made things so simple, then we had to make it complicated. Now we actually have to make it simple again.
You can't enshittify Sabre.
That's true. Yes, those things can't be killed. But, there's only bundling and unbundling, as James Barksdale said. So there we are.
One last story out of your fair country caught my eyes. So Wave, the hometown AV hero, what are they up to now, Athena?
Well, they have signed a non-binding agreement with the UK government, which is a pretty big step. I would say it's definitely a vote of confidence on the part of the UK government for robotaxis and robotaxi software. Essentially, the government's going to support Wave with the development and commercial deployment of self-driving vehicles. I'm not surprised by it really. There's been a big push over the last few months for London really to be the European trailblazer when it comes to the deployment of AVs. I think we've really decided this is going to be our thing and we're going to be ahead of the curve on it. Come one, come
Sure.
all. And then obviously Wave is homegrown, so you've got to support them first.
But what does non-binding support in that sense mean? This doesn't sound financial. It just means regulatory approval or like,
Well, they're being a bit tight-lipped about that, to be honest. I try to find out more. It's one of those kind of MOU-esque vague promises where, we support the development and the commercial deployment. It could be advisory, it could be as small as a consultation or just helping them wave policies through, pardon the pun, or it could involve financial backing. They're not really being too transparent about that right now, which tells me that they haven't actually finalized the terms of this deal. But I think they want to give the appearance, not to be too cynical, of
yeah.
doing something in an active way and the government being very involved in this deployment.
I'm yeah, I get why the government wants to show progress here. I'm sort of surprised that this has been all based around London. I mean, obviously, I can understand optically and financially, biggest cab market, but from like an infrastructural sense, it's probably the worst place to throw more cars onto the road and also the place that least needs it, right? Like you have all these second tier cities with pretty crummy public transportation by European standards. So bring these to Birmingham, bring these to Manchester. Does London need it?
Honestly, I'm always saying this. I don't shut up about this. The last thing London really needs is more congestion. We don't need deployments in Piccadilly Circus or Leicester Square. I mean, you can barely ride a bike through there. It's really not necessary, but we do have the sort of home county commuter belt, all these areas around London where people on a daily basis are commuting into the centre. These are the places, having had to visit multiple friends in the middle of nowhere in the New Forest, that it would genuinely be quite useful. And I think it would prevent a lot of drunk driving. And I think it would be a good chain in the commuting link. So yeah, I think there's probably a less of a financial model for it, but it's a bit of a shame that they're not exploring deployments around the commuter belt at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And London obviously has congestion pricing. So I'm less worried about, too much traffic in the sense that it'll be solved with supply and demand signals. And if anything, it'll just mean more revenue for TFL if more cars are trying to get in and drive the toll up. But
And
yeah,
also more police cordons destroyed, more schools driven into, more floods.
ever the optimist. Well, we get into some more projections about what the AV future looks like when I chat with Darius and Ani. And we're back. We're joined by Ani Kelkar and Darius Skurtu from the McKinsey Center for Future Mobility. You guys bring an amazing kind of cross-industry perspective to the autonomous vehicle space. I'm really excited about today's conversation. Hey, Ani. Hey, Darius.
Great to see you, Jonah. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you for joining me. Kind of bringing a global perspective. Ani's in Boston. Darius is in Munich. Obviously, robotaxis, AVs taking over the whole world. So it's good to get this global perspective.
Thank you for
Let's kick
having us,
things
Jonah.
off. You guys just released a new report called From Science Fiction to the Road to Reality. What were some of the key takeaways?
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be in the autonomous vehicle space, Jonah. I think both as someone who's excited about the technology, but also as a consumer, because we are really on the cusp of, as our report calls it, moving from this science fiction dream of self-driving cars to effectively now having conversations of how quickly will the technology scale? How quickly will consumers get access to robotaxi services? And how does the business actually pan out? How do we find the right business models? How do we find the right regulatory frameworks? And how does the value chain shake out? What our report focused on was a few things. We first looked into where are commercial autonomous vehicle services emerging. I think as of April, there were 11 cities, and we expect that to expand quite dramatically, almost doubling by the end of this year and then
Yeah.
doubling again by the end of next year. We also looked into the economics of autonomous vehicles, which we think are going to see a dramatic transition where over the next decade, autonomous vehicles could become 80% cheaper than they are today. And that has real ramifications for how people think of mobility. In our estimation, for a typical larger US city, you might get to a point very quickly where it makes economical sense for more than half of the population to give up their personal car and just use a autonomous rideshare service. And as someone who spends time in the mobility space, that is huge, right? That is
Yeah.
a disruption of personal transportation. And I think when we talk to experts that we surveyed as part of this report, they no longer see technology as a gating function for scaling. Regulations, however, still come up as a bottleneck. And increasingly, the focus of experts is how do we actually build consumer demand? How do we get beyond the initial set of consumers who are excited about the technology into really the mass market consumer? How do we cater to their needs and give them a delightful experience?
How do you go from like the cutting edge super user to just the average Joes that just want to get from A to B?
Exactly. Like what's my, gym run, what's my sort of shopping experience with a robotaxi versus the person who is this is space age, right? I want to try it first.
Yeah. So you guys called out four main factors that you think are sort of driving the impact, and that's affordability, accessibility, safety, and sustainability. Is there a particular one of those that you think is like the most interesting or kind of the biggest sort of strategic advantage for AVs?
So we believe that safety is probably the license to operate, right? I mean, this is something that simply has to be in place. So I mean, cities will require safe operations, otherwise it doesn't work. And also from a consumer perspective, they expect safe services.
Table
But
stakes.
then
Yeah.
when this is in place, right? And when we ask consumers about what really drives their market adoption, it's typically price, right? And then Ani just mentioned that. So consumers will typically make rational decisions when switching from one mode of transport to the other. And then we have also seen accessibility. That's the third most important factor. Why is that? Because typically consumers who don't own private cars, right? They are trying to get to the mode of transport which is most accessible, which is most close to them. And therefore, we believe that these three factors are typically the most relevant ones. And then sustainability, I think it depends a bit on the region you look at, right? Probably that's more like a European theme, and people will probably choose the electric shared AV service over their ICE-driven private car. But again, here we don't think, and also when we ask consumers, don't see that sustainability at the moment is one of the main decisive factors.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing that really kind of comes out throughout the report is just there's like tremendous bullishness about AVs disrupting car ownership, about this sort of pricing getting so low that it's just a no-brainer. Um, I want to, you know, we've seen similar claims before about other sort of new mobility modes, right? When car sharing peaked, when Uber came to the market, even with AVs before, I remember a Goldman Sachs report from 2013 that said by now we'd all 100% be driving AVs, right? And I look outside the window, I still see plenty of regular gas powered cars with seemingly a driver in the in the front of them, right? So what's different now?
Yeah. I think oftentimes, we tend to both overcall a trend when we're making predictions far before technology is ready, and then we undercall the trend once the technology is ready and how quickly uptake happens. We don't see people on horse carriages outside our windows anymore, unless you're in
Fair.
Central Park in New York. I think the lens to apply here for us is preference for personal car was really driven by a rational need for that was the most attractive mobility option on a total cost of ownership perspective because you had the optionality of different market segments for different consumers, right? So if you had a different sort of wage level, you had the option of purchasing used cars. If you were, on the wealthier side, you had the option of purchasing a premium car that worked for your experience. I think the second advantage of a personal vehicle was always availability. If you needed to go somewhere, you had the
Fair.
vehicle available right in your garage or right in front of your home. And When availability was a challenge in households, that's where a lot of households, particularly in the US, moved into owning multiple vehicles. I think what is different with autonomous driving now is it both solves affordability and accessibility at the same time. You can operate a much larger fleet of autonomous vehicles with attractive unit economics, where the supply side, the supply hours that you're putting into a platform like an Uber or a Lyft, are controlled by the autonomous vehicle provider. Whereas today, in either the rideshare market, supply side is also you trying to incentivize drivers to join the platform. And the demand side was really, consumers wanting to participate in a rideshare experience, either because it was a preferred mode of transportation or if it was, they did have a personal vehicle. So I think AVs changes that equation. Supply side is also now in control, and you can add that supply with a much lower cost position, which makes it much more affordable for people. But that said, I don't think we're calling, peak car or the end of the personal car. I think there are still a range of trip expectations that consumers have that shared autonomous vehicles are not necessarily going to solve. Like think of a hiking trip up the mountain or, taking a ski vacation.
Sure.
There
Trip
are still
chaining, you
going
need to keep stuff in the trunk all day long. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think, and there is also a really strong case for public transportation and micromobility. I think particularly when you get to price points that are going to be very hard even for AVs to be able to be competitive with. So the way we see AVs is it is disruptive because there will be some level of volume impact for automotive, but it is a new mode of transportation that will be absorbed within a mix of transportation that will include personal cars, transportation, public transportation, and micromobility.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So adding that all up, what are you forecasting the AV market size to get to?
I wanted actually to add something to what Ani said, right? And I think that leads us also then to the market sizes, because as I think Ani, you said right? It's a matter of use cases and what use cases do private cars address, and then also robotaxis. But I think it's also a matter of the scale. I mean, if we now look at how many robotaxis, let's say, will be on the streets in the next 10 years, right? Our very, very optimistic assumptions will yield a number of probably something around 800,000 to 1 million vehicles. Now, if you compare that number to how many private cars there are out there in the US, it's still less than 1%, right? So it's, I think, also a matter of scale and not only a matter of use cases. And then maybe another idea and thought on that. I mean, if we look at how people own their cars, right, we do not see that people are typically very active in replacing their car as soon as a alternative mode of transport comes on the market, right? So even if people start doing their urban mobility trips with shared AVs, you can do the same calculation with car sharing or other urban transport modes. They still tend to keep their private car because they are aware that they want to do other trips in rural areas and for long distances for other use cases. And therefore, we don't see that private car park over the probably next 10 to 15 years is disrupted enormously by shared autonomous vehicles. We rather see a disruption, if you will, on a trip basis. So we do expect that modal splits will definitely change, especially if you look into urban dense areas. But we don't believe that if you look at it from a cross-country perspective, shared AVs will fundamentally change the number of vehicle sales over the next 10 to 15 years, right? Now,
So,
John, I think you asked me about the market numbers, right?
yeah.
So basically what we do and how we arrive at these market numbers is we believe that the market is going through two phases, right? At the moment, we believe that it's still a supply constrained market. So what we do is we look at the most relevant providers of robotaxis, robo shuttles, and discount, so to say, for their financial abilities, for their commercial scale, and also for their technological capabilities, right? And then what we do is we believe that in the second phase, the market basically transforms into a consumer-driven market where ultimately supply is not the basic constraint anymore, It's much more the question of, will consumers ultimately switch from a private car, from a ride-hailing vehicle, from a car-sharing vehicle to robotaxis, right? So what we do then in the model is we basically look at kilometers traveled by each mode of transport and try to understand the shifting behavior of consumers from these modes of transport, right? And we believe that this is especially a matter of use cases, as we discussed now. It's a matter of price and also a matter of convenience and speed, right? So how far are you in city traffic? And when we do this modeling, we estimate the market in the US to be roughly 190 to 230 billion US dollars by 2035. This is quite sizable, right? It basically assumes that all major cities in the US allow shared AV services and that you will have a minimum of 5 large players in the market that deploy shared AVs at scale.
Yeah, with a number that large, you can understand why the whole automotive industry is scrambling for their piece right now.
Absolutely.
So,
And it
one obvious little piece of supply and demand, right? When things get cheaper, people use more of them. And so a lot of this is presupposing AVs become very affordable, but that could then mean all these second order effects around congestion, people taking longer drives, people moving further out into the burbs and just snoozing as they drive to work. What are the sort of, you know, preparations that cities, DOTs, states need to be making now to get ahead of that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think that is a very legitimate concern that all of us as citizens of cities need to have in terms of how we manage our traffic as a network. I think one of the opportunities that we have when we move to this sort of more AI-driven transportation paradigm is to have the ability to ensure a more optimal mix of services that are available. And what I mean by that is today, the levers available to cities are pretty limited in terms of congestion pricing or having streets that are in certain hours. As you're heading into downtown New York, this street will be closed for
Sure.
pedestrian traffic, etc.
Yeah.
I think there is an opportunity to much more dynamically manage traffic patterns and give sort of more real-time information to consumers in terms of this is the optimal modal mix for you to go from, origin to destination at this time of the day. But to get to that sort of vision of more orchestrated, organized traffic, we really need to expand the dialogue and collaboration between all of the autonomous vehicle technology providers, the mobility demand aggregators, the transportation network platforms, as well as cities to stack hands on how do we arrive on we want to promote the use of modern technology, but how do we not concede some sort of more intangible benefits of city living and sort of see, congestion rise? And there are some ideas, you can have dedicated lanes. You can have dedicated lanes that don't need to be physically dedicated, but because all of these vehicles are now connected, you can sort of
Digital
manage
lanes.
traffic through
Yeah.
that digitally. I think you can also have sort of an incentive scheme for people to use shared autonomous vehicles. I think the easiest way to tackle congestion is by sharing transportation more, particularly now that you have a network and when people are traveling the same distances. One of the challenges with shared mobility so far has been you had to really make a trade-off between the lower price of a shared mode of transportation and the inconvenience of having a extended journey time or having to go somewhere else to pick up the car.
Yeah.
As more of the network becomes connected, I think you can start solving these problems. But it's going to be interesting to see how this transition plays out.
Yeah. Although
And
the one thing I'm a little concerned about on the shared mode, and this is, I like it, right? I'm a Uber pool, user from time to time, but sharing is more logical when it's expensive, right? If something's already cheap, cutting cheap in half doesn't mean much to you. So the incentives there might kind of mismatch. So, personally speaking, yeah, I'm a little worried about AV congestion. Darius, you had something to say.
But that's exactly what we practically see, right? When we talk to cities and these providers, there's oftentimes I mean, we talked about a dialogue, right? Oftentimes, what happens is these players come into the cities without a pre-alignment on what is actually the target, right, of this whole shared AV scheme. So at the moment, you see a bit of a, if you will, siloed approach between what cities do and what robotaxi, shuttle providers do, right? And oftentimes, cities, of course, look more at the public benefits. They try to make mobility more inclusive. And then on the other hand side, these players are, of course, looking mostly at their economics, at how to land grab market shares quickly, right? And I think we have probably seen like very good examples for now, but as soon as we go into cities where maybe public transit authorities are not as strongly positioned, right? I think to pre-align on common targets is essential actually to also be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. So if that's how regulators should be getting ready, what about the broader mobility and automotive industry? What steps do they need to be making to prepare?
So I mean, of course, there are probably, I think the main theme is scaling, right? And if you look at let's go maybe from top to down, right, across the value chain, I think OEMs definitely need to be prepared to manufacture cars that are not made for private ownership, but for shared ownership, right? So that means they need to be durable. They need to be able to, so to say, to be able to be accessible for shared AV manufacturers to access safety critical components, to also allow them to quickly retrofit the cars, right? Because at the moment we talk about a few thousand vehicles, but we believe that in probably 5 to 10 years, we talk about tens or even hundreds of thousands of vehicles that will be sold across the globe, right? I think that's one thing. If you look at it from a fleet operator perspective, right? These fleet operators oftentimes they come from the traditional right. But we do believe that, especially for shared autonomous vehicles, you need specific qualifications. Think about remote assistance, think about technicians that are working in the depots, right, to maintain the AV stack also. So there are, if you will, new role descriptions that we haven't seen now. And then last but not least, if you look at it from a um, mobility platform perspective, right? I think these players, and we have also seen some great examples in the past, will need to open their platforms to also autonomous companies, right? Because in the end, if you look at it from a value chain perspective, we do believe that the value chain for AVs will disaggregate, right? There is no need and no, so to say, intention for a Waymo to acquire the customers themselves, right? And that's why we do believe that the collaborations also between the traditional AV stack providers on the one hand side, and on the other hand side, the mobility platforms will actually intensify, right? And we need that, of course, to scale.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So people following this space, you hear Waymo's name thrown around a lot, but obviously AV movement is global. So it's not just US, it's European, it's Asia. Are there other interesting announcements you've seen from across the globe in the space recently?
Yeah, I think one of the things that gets us excited is, already we have 11 cities with commercial AV operations, and we will end up with, about 40 cities by the end of next year. And this is just tracking announcements, and the announcements are coming from players, beyond Waymo. In the US, you have announcements from not just Zoox and Tesla, but also increasingly the announcement that we saw with Nuro and Uber, as well as May Mobility and Lyft. Europe, obviously, Moya from Volkswagen Group is sort of already operating fleets, sort of famously came out in London. And then the story that I think a lot of folks in the West miss is what's happening in China, whether it's the Apollo service from Baidu or VRide or Pony AI. There are plenty of players who are deploying and deploying globally as we speak.
Yeah, yeah, it's a worldwide land grab. So final thoughts. I want to kind of tie this back to almost where we started. Getting AV adoption at scale, it's not just a technological question, but it's a political one, right? You need sort of acceptance from consumers, and consumers are voters. So you need the sort of people that they elect to say, this is okay in our city, in our state. How are people at this moment feeling about autonomy? Like, is it looking bullish or bearish from that angle?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, right? And that's exactly also what we try to grasp basically year by year. I think The good note is that when we do our consumer surveys, we see that 44% of US consumers are willing to use shared AVs in the future, right? And this number comes from those who haven't used shared AVs before, right? So there seems to be a genuine interest, if you will, into the technology. I personally believe that it ultimately boils down to, will these vehicles really serve their everyday lives and problems, right? Because typically what we see in the mobility world is there is a phase of hyperness and so to say technical innovation where people are keen to use new technologies, but it's those modes that survive who ultimately serve the use cases of the everyday life. So can I use the vehicles to go to groceries? Do I have access to the trunk? Is it easy to get into the vehicle, outside the vehicle? If you think about it from a, if you will, political perspective, right? I think one of the big promises of these players is that they will democratize and make mobility more inclusive for everybody, right? So I think as a shared EV provider, you will also need to prove that you make these vehicles for those who cannot drive a car today. So it's the young people, it's the elderly people, right? And I do believe that probably in the next 2, 3, 4 years, we will see innovations in the service model and also technologically that will try to exactly grasp these use cases and then to ultimately, hopefully, make it attractive for a big majority of the population.
Yeah. Ani, anything to add to that?
No, I think look, I think there is a lot of excitement from consumers who even haven't tried the technology yet. A lot of these survey responses will change as the technology scales and you become more familiar with it. I'm sure with as with every technology, there is a fear of the unfamiliar, there is a fear of change, but once you actually experience it, I think the openness will go up. But the concerns are real. I think you brought up congestion. I think there's an impact on jobs. There's an impact on revenue pools shifting from the traditional sort of automotive value chain, and so the transition needs to be managed in a thoughtful, sort of equitable way. But I think ultimately, the promise of safer, more affordable, more accessible mobility is not too far.
Yeah. Very exciting. Ani, Darius, thanks so much.